The betrayal commander Lyrics floated in the cramped emergency pod, her six-fingered hands pressed against the viewport, as she watched the last traces of her fleet's engine signatures fade into the cosmic dark. The Zalathi corporate mining fleet had made their calculation. They had run their numbers through the quantum processors 3 times, and the answer remained the same. Rescuing her would cost more than training her replacement. The math was perfect. The logic was flawless, and she was going to die because of it. 3 hours ago, she had been supervising mining operations on asteroid K447 in the Outer Rim territories. The operation was routine, just another extraction of rare minerals that kept the Zalathi economy running. Her species had perfected resource extraction over millennia, turning it into an art form of efficiency and precision. Every movement calculated, every decision optimized, every risk assessed down to the smallest decimal point. Then the drilling equipment had malfunctioned. Not a major malfunction, just a small explosion in the primary bore that sent shrapnel through the station's hull. Most of the crew evacuated immediately to the main ship. But Lyrics had stayed behind for exactly 47 seconds to secure the data cores containing 6 months of survey information. Those 47 seconds cost her everything. The secondary explosion caught her at the emergency airlock. It threw her into the escape pod and triggered the automatic launch sequence before she could stop it. The pod's navigation system, damaged by the blast, sent her careening away from the fleet's planned trajectory. By the time she regained consciousness and tried to correct course, she was already 17,000 kilometers off track and accelerating in the wrong direction. She remembered the conversation with Fleet Commander Zoran perfectly. Every word was burned into her memory like acid on metal. She had called for help using the emergency channel, explaining her situation with the calm professionalism expected of a Zalathi officer. The response came after a 12-minute delay, the time it took for the fleet's collective intelligence to process the rescue scenarios. Commander Lyrics, Zoran's voice had been emotionless, as was proper for their kind. We have analyzed your situation. Fuel expenditure for course correction and retrieval would be 4.7 million credits. Training your replacement would be 2.3 million credits. The mathematics are clear. She had argued, of course. She mentioned her 20 years of experience, her knowledge of the mining operations, the relationship she had built with suppliers and clients. But numbers did not care about experience. Spreadsheets did not factor in loyalty. The corporate algorithms that governed Zalathi society had spoken. Your sacrifice will be noted in the efficiency reports, Zoran had said before cutting the connection. Your family will receive the standard termination package. That was 6 days ago. 6 days of watching her oxygen gauge slowly decrease. 6 days of rationing the emergency water supply that was only meant to last 48 hours. 6 days of feeling her body grow weaker as the pod's failing heating system lost its battle against the absolute zero of space. The Zalathi were a proud species. They had built their interstellar civilization on the foundations of pure logic and mathematical precision. Emotions were viewed as evolutionary baggage, remnants of a primitive past that other species had failed to overcome. They prided themselves on making the hard choices, the optimal choices without the messy interference of feelings. But floating in the dark, Lyrics began to question everything she had been taught. Was survival without compassion really strength? Was a society that could abandon its members so easily truly advanced? The pod's emergency beacon continued its futile broadcast into the void, a mathematical probability approaching zero that anyone would hear it in this remote sector of space. She had started recording messages on day 3, when the hallucinations began. Not for rescue, she had given up on that. But maybe someday someone would find her pod and wonder about the being inside. She wanted them to know that the Zalathi's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They had calculated away their souls. The pod's life support system made a grinding noise, then fell silent. Another system failing. She had maybe 12 hours of air left, 14 if she remained perfectly still. The emergency lights had died yesterday, leaving her in a darkness so complete it felt solid. Only the faint glow of the oxygen meter provided any light, its numbers falling with mechanical certainty. She thought about her clutch siblings back on Zalathi Prime. They would be notified of her termination through the standard channels. Her personal effects would be cataloged and distributed according to her efficiency rating. Her replacement was probably already in training, studying her reports and learning from her methods. Life would continue without even a pause to mark her passing. The universe, her professors had taught her, was indifferent to individual suffering. It operated on laws of physics and mathematics that cared nothing for hope or despair. The strong survived by accepting this truth and adapting to it. The weak perished by fighting against it. She had believed this completely until now. But dying alone in the void, she wondered if the universe's indifference was exactly why beings should care for each other. If the cosmos would not provide meaning, perhaps conscious creatures had to create it themselves. Perhaps the ability to choose compassion over calculation was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. A soft beep interrupted her thoughts. The proximity sensor, one of the few systems still functioning. She forced herself to float to the console, her limbs heavy and uncoordinated from oxygen deprivation. The display showed something impossible. A ship was approaching. Not Zalathi, the signature was all wrong. The vessel was using an inefficient drive system that no Zalathi engineer would ever design. It was burning through fuel at an absurd rate, accelerating hard toward her position. The communication system crackled to life, flooding the pod with static, and then a voice. The words were in galactic standard, but spoken with an accent she had only heard in rumors and stories. It was warm and urgent and completely illogical. Unknown vessel, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earthship Stubborn Hope. We received your distress signal. Hold on, we're coming to get you. Do you copy? Please respond if you can hear this. Lyric stared at the communication panel in shock. Humans. The young species that other races whispered about in confusion and amazement. The ones who did everything wrong according to conventional wisdom, yet somehow kept surviving and thriving. The ones who made decisions based on something other than pure logic. Her voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat dry from days of rationed water. This is Commander Lyrics of the Zalathi mining fleet. I am running out of oxygen. My pod is damaged. Rescue is not economically viable. There was a pause, then the human's voice came back, filled with an emotion Lyrics couldn't quite identify. Commander, I don't know what economically viable means in your language, but in ours, it means absolutely nothing when someone needs help. We'll be there in 6 minutes. Can you hold on for 6 more minutes? 6 minutes. After 6 days of dying alone, someone was coming. Not because it made mathematical sense, not because of any logical calculation, but simply because she needed help. The absurdity of it made her emit a sound she had never made before, something between a laugh and a sob. I will try, she managed to say. Don't try, Captain Chen replied firmly. Succeed. That's an order, Commander. We didn't burn half our fuel reserves racing to this coordinate just to find a corpse. You're going to live, and you're going to tell me how you ended up out here. The universe is too big and too cold for us to lose anyone we can save. The connection stayed open, and Lyrics could hear the bustle of human activity in the background. Orders being shouted, systems being prepared, the controlled chaos of a rescue operation in progress. It was inefficient and emotional and completely contrary to everything she had been taught about proper procedure. It was also the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. As the human ship grew larger in her viewport, its hull scarred and patched from countless missions, Lyrics realized she was witnessing something her species had never understood. The humans had figured out something that all the Zalathi's calculations had missed. Sometimes the most logical thing to do was to ignore logic altogether. The Stubborn Hope moved into position with surprising grace for such an ungainly vessel. She could see the rescue team preparing in the airlock, their movements quick and practiced. They were really going to save her. These strangers who owed her nothing, who would gain nothing from her rescue, were risking themselves to pull her from the void. The pod shuddered as magnetic grapples locked onto its hull. She heard the hiss of the docking seal being established. Then the inner door of her pod was opening, and human hands were reaching for her, warm and strong and impossibly real. The human paradox, the first thing Lyrics noticed about humans was their faces. Every one of them showed emotions so clearly it was almost embarrassing. The rescue team's expressions shifted from concern to relief to joy as they pulled her into their ship. No Zalathi would ever display such naked feeling in front of strangers. It was considered primitive, inefficient, a waste of energy that could be better used elsewhere. But as the medical team surrounded her with their scanning equipment and oxygen masks, she found their emotional transparency strangely comforting. She could read their intentions in their eyes, see their determination in the set of their jaws. They were not just performing a duty. They genuinely cared whether she lived or died. Captain Sarah Chen appeared as they wheeled her into the medical bay. She was shorter than Lyrics had expected, with dark hair streaked with premature gray and eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies of compassion. She walked alongside the gurney, one hand resting lightly on Lyrics's arm. "You're safe now," the captain said softly. "My medical officer is going to take good care of you. Dr. Martinez has treated dozens of species. He'll figure out what you need." Dr. Martinez was a large human with gentle hands and a voice that reminded Lyrics of distant thunder. He worked with an efficiency that would have impressed even a Zalathi administrator, but he talked constantly as he worked, explaining everything he was doing and why. It was completely unnecessary from a medical standpoint, but somehow it made the procedures less frightening. "Your physiology is fascinating," he said as he adjusted the oxygen mixture to match her requirements, similar to our Terran salamanders in some ways. "Semi-aquatic ancestry. That would explain the gill slits, even if they're vestigial now. Don't worry. I'm not going to publish any papers about you without permission. Patient confidentiality is sacred, even out here in the black." Over the next few hours, as the human medicines worked their way through her system and strength returned to her limbs, Lyrics learned more about her rescuers. The Stubborn Hope was not a military vessel or a corporate ship. It was what humans called a search and rescue vessel, privately owned and operated by a crew who had dedicated their lives to finding those lost in space. "But how do you profit from this?" Lyrics asked Captain Chen when she came to check on her patient. "The fuel alone for this rescue must have cost tens of thousands of credits. I have nothing to pay you with." Chen laughed, not mockingly but with genuine warmth. "Profit? Commander, if we wanted profit, we'd be hauling cargo or mining asteroids. We do this because it needs doing. Because somewhere out there, floating in the dark, someone is praying for a miracle. And sometimes, if we're fast enough and lucky enough, we get to be that miracle." It made no sense. The captain must have seen the confusion on Lyrics's face because she sat down on the edge of the medical bed and continued. "Let me tell you something about humans, Commander. We're not the strongest species in the galaxy. We're not the smartest or the fastest or the most advanced. But we have something that a lot of other species seem to have forgotten. We have stubbornness that borders on insanity and compassion that defies all logic. It's gotten us killed more times than I can count. But it's also the reason we've survived everything the universe has thrown at us." She paused, looking out the viewport at the stars streaming by. 10 years ago, my sister was on a colony transport that suffered a catastrophic failure. Everyone wrote them off as dead. The math said no one could survive that long without life support. But one stubborn human ship, kept searching. They found her and 12 other survivors living in a cargo hold they'd managed to seal off, surviving on emergency rations and recycled air. That ship was called the Irrational Hope. When I bought this vessel, I knew what I had to name it. Over the following days, as the Stubborn Hope continued its patrol route through the sector, Lyrics observed the human crew with growing amazement. They operated on principles that seemed to actively contradict survival instincts. When they received a distress call from a Crexian raider that had attacked human ships in the past, they still responded. When they found the raider crippled and its crew dying, they still rescued them. "But they're your enemies," Lyrics said to the navigation officer, a young human named James who had been teaching her to play something called chess. James shrugged. "We're our enemies. Right now they're just beings who need help. We can sort out the enemy stuff later when everyone's breathing properly." The Crexian captain, a massive reptilian being covered in battle scars, had been equally baffled. When he demanded to know why the humans had saved them, Captain Chen had simply said, "Because you needed saving. Don't make me regret it." The Crexian had stared at her for a long moment, then bowed deeply, a gesture of respect Lyrics had never seen a Crexian make to another species. As her health returned, Lyrics began helping around the ship. She used her engineering knowledge to improve their sensor array and her mathematical skills to optimize their search patterns. The crew welcomed her contributions with enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to their value. "You don't understand," the chief engineer, a woman named Rosa, told her. "Every improvement you make might help us reach someone a few minutes faster. A few minutes can be the difference between a rescue and a recovery. You're not just tweaking machinery, you're saving lives." It was during her third week aboard that they received the signal that would change everything. A massive passenger liner had suffered a cascade failure in its jump drive, leaving it stranded between systems. The vessel carried over 3,000 beings from a dozen different species. Their life support would fail in 72 hours. The nearest official rescue vessels were 5 days away. The math was simple and terrible. Most of the passengers would die before help arrived. Every species was running the same calculations, coming to the same logical conclusion. It was a tragedy, but an unavoidable one. Every species except the humans. Captain Chen called an all-hands meeting in the mess hall. She stood before her crew of 30 humans and 1 Zalathi and laid out the situation. We can reach them in 60 hours if we push our engines past red line. We'll probably damage them beyond repair. We have emergency supplies for maybe 300 beings, not 3,000. We'll have to get creative. We'll have to take risks. We'll probably violate a dozen safety regulations and several laws of physics. Anyone want to stay behind? Not a single hand went up. Instead, the crew immediately began brainstorming solutions. They could manufacture oxygen from the ice of nearby comets. They could cannibalize their own life support to extend the liners. They could use their shuttle to ferry the most vulnerable to safety first. Every idea was insane by Zalathi standards, but the humans threw themselves into the planning with frightening enthusiasm. "You're going to get yourselves killed," Lyric said to Captain Chen as they plotted the intercept course. "Maybe," Chen admitted. "But we're going to save as many as we can first. You don't have to come with us, Commander. We can drop you at the next station." Lyrics looked at the human captain, at her crew preparing for an impossible rescue, at the determination written on every face. She thought about her own fleet, calculating her worth and finding it wanting. She thought about floating alone in the dark, waiting to die because the math didn't work out. "No," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I'm staying. Someone needs to keep you irrational humans from getting yourselves killed." Chen grinned. "Welcome to the crew, Commander. Hope you're ready to do some impossible math." They reached the liner with 3 hours to spare, their engines smoking and their hull groaning from the stress. What followed was 48 hours of the most insane, chaotic, brilliant rescue operation Lyrics had ever witnessed. Humans worked without sleep, sharing their oxygen when the manufactured supplies ran low, giving up their own rations to feed frightened children of species they'd never even seen before. When a section of the liner's hull breached, 3 humans in maintenance suits threw themselves into the vacuum to seal it from the outside, trusting their crewmates to pull them back before their suits failed. When the medical bay overflowed with injured, the crew turned the cargo hold into a triage center, using everything from dinner tables to cabinet doors as makeshift gurneys. They saved them all. Every single one of the 3,017 beings aboard that liner lived because a ship called the Stubborn Hope refused to accept the logical outcome. The story spread through the galaxy like wildfire, carried by 3,000 voices speaking in dozens of languages, all saying the same thing. The humans came for us when no one else would. Lyric stayed with the Stubborn Hope after that. She sent a message to the Zalathi mining fleet, informing them that she had found a more efficient use of her skills. She didn't tell them that efficiency had nothing to do with it. She had found something her species had calculated away long ago. Purpose beyond profit, strength through compassion, and the savage joy of spitting in the face of impossible odds. Months later, when the Zalathi Corporate Council contacted her, asking her to explain the human paradox that was disrupting their models of species behavior, she sent them a simple response. "The humans have discovered that the most logical thing is sometimes to abandon logic altogether. They understand that in a universe of cold mathematics, choosing to care is the most radical act of all. They know that every life saved rewrites the equation of what is possible." She never received a reply, but 3 months after that, she heard that a Zalathi vessel had responded to a distress call from a competitor's ship, citing non-mathematical considerations in their report. Then another did the same, and another. The humans had started something that couldn't be stopped by any calculation. They had reminded the galaxy that consciousness came with a choice: to accept the cold equations of existence or to rage against them with every breath, to let the universe's indifference define them, or to create meaning through their actions. Captain Chen found her one night standing at the observation deck, watching the stars wheel slowly past. "Regret staying with us, Commander?" Lyrics turned to the human who had saved her life by refusing to do the math. "No, Captain. I've learned something from your species. You've turned irrationality into an art form. You've made compassion into a weapon against entropy. You've proven that sometimes the most logical thing to do is the thing that makes no sense at all. Is that a compliment or an insult? Chen asked with a laugh. Both, Lyrex replied. Definitely both. And that's the most human thing about it. The stubborn hope continued its patrol, its sensors always searching, its crew always ready. They were a tiny spark of warmth in an infinite cold, a small defiance against the mathematical certainty of loss. They were humans doing what humans did best, the impossible, the inadvisable, the absolutely necessary work of keeping hope alive in the darkness. And now they had a Zalathi engineer who had learned their most important equation. One life saved multiplies into infinite possibilities, and no amount of logic could calculate the value of a single act of kindness in a universe that offered none. The emergency beacon sounded again. Another soul lost in the void, another impossible rescue to attempt. Captain Chen looked at her crew, human and alien alike, and saw the same determination on every face. Well, she said, let's go be impossible again. The stubborn hope turned toward the signal, engines burning bright against the darkness, carrying its crew toward another chance to prove that in a universe of cold logic, choosing to care was the most powerful rebellion of all.